Hey, Russell, thank you so much for coming on. There are journalists who have reported that cases of espionage in Taiwan by the Chinese are rising. Is that because they actually are increasing or because people are just getting better at catching Chinese spies?
Well, that's an excellent question. The Chinese espionage threats facing Taiwan is growing in sophistication, scale, and also the intensity. And I think the numbers do tell an important story here, because in 2023 and 2024, there were a total of 112 individuals who were prosecuted for espionage and espionage-related crimes in Taiwan. To put that number into perspective, between 2006 and 2016, a period of 10 years, there were only a little over 40 individuals who were prosecuted for espionage and espionage-related crimes. So I think that number is truly striking, and so the number is certainly increasing. There is, however, I think nuances to those numbers that's important for your audience members to understand. The first of which is that 40 over 40 individuals that I referenced earlier. I don't think any reasonably informed observers of the threats that Taiwan faces from the People's Republic of China really believes the fact that there were only 40 or so operatives, spies in Taiwan caught operating within a 10-year time period. So those numbers were woefully low, and I think there are several reasons for that. One is a lack of political will. Another, as you referenced earlier, perhaps a lack of capacity to be able to catch spies. But it's what is absolutely clear, though, is that the numbers are increasing, and I think the authorities in Taiwan need to get a better handle of that.
Another number, you've said that 66% of espionage cases that have involved charges also involve either active duty or retired military.
That's correct.
Tell me more about who these operatives are. Tell me more about these spy rings.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is absolutely the truth that the military is the prime target of Chinese intelligence operations targeting Taiwan. There's a very telling case involving a 10-person spy ring that Taiwan authorities foiled in 2024. The mastermind of this conspiracy was someone by the surname of Chen, who, after retiring from the military, had recruited some of his fellow comrades to recruit other active duty military officers with varying ranks. One was a major who was serving at the chemical, biological, and nuclear testing facility in the Taiwan Army. Another individual by the surname Hsiao, who had actually set up a male escort business to recruit other active duty military personnel who were requiring short on money. But they were able to entice a lieutenant colonel in the Army Aviation and Special Command Forces with a conspiracy to fly a Chinook heavy lift helicopter during a training exercises onto a Chinese aircraft carrier along the Taiwan Strait. And this case, I think, really underscores not necessarily the technological desire to have, the capabilities embedded in a Chinook helicopter, which was developed in the 1960s, but really for the psychological effect in terms of the effect that it could have on morale amongst the Taiwan's military service members who would see a fellow member defect to the Chinese.
And now I have to ask, male escort business, Chinese spying? Tell me more.
Well, this is a tried and true method in terms of really attacking some of the vulnerabilities of these military personnel, and it's not unknown that many do have financial difficulties. And so this individual, Xie, who was one of the main conspirators of this spy ring, had set up a male escort business in the central industrial cluster of Taiwan in Taichung, and had enticed other service members who were struggling for money to work with work for him in this mail escort business. And you know what? Fortunately, he did set up that business because actually it was his activities and the activities of his business that tipped off authorities at first to be able to identify his relationship with the lieutenant colonel from the Army Aviation and Special Command Forces for the irregular payments that were being made between him and the lieutenant colonel.
Were the male escorts aware of the fact that he was working for the Chinese?
It's not known whether or not they had known this, but I think that there were. It's interesting because this individual, his business, he would actually call it the sort of People's Liberation Army Garrison Command, as his sort of his business sort of pitch, and he would fashion himself to call himself a general of the People's Liberation Army. I think people may have taken this as a sort of a business gimmick, but I think in this case, it was very revealing, and that he just got too arrogant and thought that he could not be caught, and he would not be caught. But luckily, the Taiwan authorities were able to apprehend him before his conspiracies had materialized.
That is certainly a creative side hustle.
Yes, indeed. Yes, that's right.
So tell me about the sentences they received. Are the sentences getting harsher?
They are. And this is a positive sign, I think, overall in terms of the sentencings handed down by Taiwan's courts. They've been woefully really low over the years, where people were getting basically slaps on the wrist for charges of espionage. And I think in the recent case involving this 10-person spy ring, some of the sentences were, I think, much higher than average. So, for instance, some of the main conspirators received 9 to 13 years, and on a relative scale, this is far higher than what were handed down in previous cases.
There have also been cases of so-called surrender films. What are they? And explain how it works and why people are even doing this.
Yeah. The surrender films are growing in number, and they reflect a very troubling trend in the espionage tactics that the PRC is utilizing against Taiwan. In this particular case involving the 10-person spy ring, there were 2 junior officers who were recruited to basically film themselves making the announcement that they will surrender in the event of a military conflict, surrender to the People's Liberation Army. And at a time when cross-strait tensions are growing intensely, to have fellow soldiers announce essentially that they will surrender in the event of a military conflict could really have a demoralizing effect on fellow soldiers. It could also impact other soldiers' willingness to fight if their fellow soldiers are surrendering at the first sight of battle.
If they're making these surrender films and the films are being distributed, then aren't they essentially incriminating themselves?
Well, yeah, that's right. But I think there's a degree to which these individuals didn't think that they would get caught, that this was perhaps and that they needed the money. It seems like the primary motivation in some of these cases involving the filming of the surrender films involved money. And in other cases wherein the individuals were apprehended, expressed remorse that they had done something wrong, and essentially basically did not believe that they would get caught for filming such a film. In the past, ideology was a motivating factor in terms of a greater sense of Chinese nationalism that would have appealed to older soldiers who had served, and against this trend that there is a growing demography within Taiwan that sees themselves as solely Taiwanese, a sense of greater Chinese-ness is not necessarily going to be the primary motivation. I think in these cases involving the junior officers, it was really money that drove them to conduct those heinous acts.
And these were essentially to weaken morale in the military ranks.
Correct.
We've also seen instances of critical undersea cables near Taiwan being cut. And Chinese officials have denied that they are doing this, that this is purposeful. They have accused Taiwanese officials of manipulation. But is this also a part of the story of Chinese spying?
It absolutely is. And it reflects a growing pattern of the Chinese use of gray zone warfare activities targeting Taiwan. These cuttings of the submarine cables to connecting Taiwan's offshore islands to the outside world are
Communications primarily.
communications, right? And communications that rely both that are essential for not only normal communications, but also for economic security matters, as well as in time of a military crisis. How would then these issues be their experiences be communicated to the outside world? When you think about, for instance, the effectiveness of how Ukraine has been able to communicate to the outside world during its continuing military crisis with Russia, I think it's not hard to see why Taiwan would be very concerned in the event that its communication cables are going to be severed in the event of a military crisis, and they would be entirely dependent upon satellite communication, which have much lower bandwidth as well as latency for how to allow them to communicate outside.
Tell me more about the gray zone operations.
Well, this is an area where the Chinese military has been very effective in leveraging actions that they would take both in the military and non-military spaces that basically fall below the threshold of a kinetic military attack or afford them with a degree of plausible deniability, and then be able to basically salami slice their way to changing facts on the ground that would allow them to push their norms over, push and change the perceptions and behaviors of the population, affect the political calculus of the Taiwan leadership. And they involve a host of activities that include not only the cable cuttings, but the floating of surveillance balloons over these offshore islands.
So, a couple years ago, when the Chinese spy balloon was floating over the United States, that's something that has also happened in Taiwan.
Constantly over Taiwan and
Constantly
over its offshore islands and
How often?
over sensitive. Well, the numbers are not publicly disclosed, but they are a lot more common occurrences where these balloons are spotted over military installations.
The United States shot down the spy balloon, and then they went to recover it to learn more about it. That's not something that Taipei has done with the spy balloons that float overhead?
No. I think that the problem for Taiwan is that there are restraints. I think they're trying, they're trying to be more restrained with terms of how they handle a lot of these gray zone activities. There are domestic political factors to consider. There's our international factors to consider. Taiwan does not want to be seen as being the troublemaker in any sense, even though I think the shooting down of a surveillance balloon would be, I think, reasonably justifiable. But in the event that these balloons were, in fact, hobbyist or commercial balloons that the PRC is flying or over Taiwan, then that could really affect public opinion, both within Taiwan and internationally.
You mentioned public opinion. Tell me about the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda and also their covert influence.
Yes, I think this is an area that does not get nearly enough attention. Well, there's a very telling case from 2018 involving disinformation that took the life of a Taiwanese diplomat. This case surrounded the alleged handling of the local consulate of Taiwan in Osaka, which is in the western regions of Japan. And after a major typhoon hit the region, there were many stranded travelers in that area that could not leave or get the required support. And there were allegations that the Chinese embassy were able to assist some of these travelers, in large part due to the mishandling of the matter by this local consulate, which was responsible for that region of Japan. Now, it turned out that this disinformation originated from Weibo accounts, a Chinese social media application that then got picked up on local bulletin board sites in Taiwan's internet that are very popular, very frequently used. That then got picked up on by local medias and local media collaborators in Taiwan, and it really created this firestorm of disinformation that eventually, I think, affected this diplomat, and sadly and tragically, he took his life afterwards.
That's very tragic if that was what led to him killing himself.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he left a suicide note, but it's not all clear cut what has caused the immediate events. But these events, I think, really underscored the potential deadly effects that CCP propaganda can have against its targets.
Last year, there was also an election in Taiwan. There was disinformation around who is now president, President Lai Ching-te. Mm-hmm. One that I read about was that he fathered an illegitimate child. But what about the potential for influence during the 2024 election? Because I'll say that in the United States, the intelligence community said that the Chinese were not involving themselves. They concluded that at least on the federal level, there would be problems for them whether a Democrat or a Republican were elected. It's a different story on state and local level. Mm-hmm. But tell me about how Taiwan's election last year was affected by Chinese propaganda, Chinese influence.
Yeah, I think really Taiwan is the proverbial canary in the coal mine when it comes to Chinese intelligence activities. And there are many different methods and tactics that the Chinese uses in Taiwan that then finds its way elsewhere. And one new method that we saw in the 2024 Taiwan elections was actually the use of fake opinion polls in an attempt to try to lead public opinion in Taiwan. And this involved, again, in the year leading up to the presidential elections in January 2024, a local reporter working with a professor who had essentially created fake opinion polls, a series of 9. And one of these polls that were produced in early December, very close to elections, was showing that the opposition candidates were leading in these polls in an attempt to try to drive up interest and support amongst other maybe undecided voters who would then be able to maybe would be more willing then to show support. And so authorities in Taiwan were able to identify these individuals, spot these polls that had been conducted, and basically prosecute them on charges. And they were able to just more recently to increase those charges.
Taiwan also has centers to debunk disinformation. Last year, the Cognitive Warfare Research Center opened. Have these efforts been successful?
Yes. Well, Taiwan's civil society has been an instrumental part of the fight against Chinese disinformation. There is a very robust and active civic hacking community within Taiwan that have really contributed a great deal to being able to add additional credibility as well as capabilities to debunking this rampant Chinese disinformation tactics. It's one thing, I think, for the Taiwan government to say something is wrong or something is false. It's quite another when you are able to have greater legitimacy amongst the population of people working to sort of crowdsource fact-checking in Taiwan. And this is exactly what some of these civil society actors have been so effective in doing, in being able to do this in a much more real-time and collective manner. So these organizations are clearly prime targets for, I think, PRC influence activities, although at the moment right now it's not clear to what extent they've been successful in penetrating these organizations.
I would certainly imagine that spies from China would be interested in infiltrating some of these efforts.
Right, yeah.
And there hasn't been any evidence of that at the moment.
Well, none that have been prosecuted in Taiwan's courts, which would suggest, admissible evidence of a crime having been committed. I think there are known efforts of different sort of
collaborators, influencers. Yeah,
correct.
Tell me more about that community.
Right. So, this is something that's very unique to Taiwan's information ecosystem, and that involves the local media collaborators that basically serve as Chinese propagandists in Taiwan. And there was a very revealing case involving a declassified public disclosure made by Taiwan security agencies involving a major media company in Taiwan essentially having to get its opinion editorials authorized by the Chinese government. These classifications and disclosures are not very common, and so there clearly had been a high degree of concern with the activities of these media companies that are essentially taking orders from the PRC government on what what lines they can take on their editorials that shape, of course, public opinion in Taiwan.
How successful have China's efforts been in this space?
Assessing the impact of the Chinese influence operations against Taiwan is complicated. It's because you can't just look at the effectiveness in terms of a straightforward example of, were they successful in terms of shaping their target desires? So in many cases, in many of the cases that we've highlighted here in just our conversation, they weren't very successful, right? Because Taiwan authorities were able to detect and identify the threats before they materialize. But this lack of effectiveness is only contingent upon the enormous resources that both the Taiwan government was able to invest in responding to these crises, and it's questionable whether or not this level of activities, this level of intensity, can keep pace with the threats that Taiwan faces from the Chinese military, from the Chinese intelligence apparatuses. And so I think the verdict is still out in terms of really how successful the Chinese is. I think the Chinese government thinks that it is successful. Its president and its general secretary have doubled down on its propaganda and its influence operations targeting Taiwan. The Chinese leadership have repeatedly referred to the United Front activities as one of its magic weapons. And there's been
United Front Workers Department, which does not just propaganda but covert influence as well as essentially renditions.
That's right. Transnational repression in these overseas police stations operating around the world. And really, Taiwan is ground zero when it comes to Chinese United Front activities.
So, in terms of where China is putting its resources, Taiwan is second to the United States. Does Taiwan have the resources, have the capability to deal with the influx of espionage as well as we're talking about, disinformation, influence?
Let's keep in mind that according to one estimate, a Taiwan estimate, that there are anywhere up towards 5,000 spies in Taiwan. China can always spend more money than Taiwan on espionage, but it is a matter of being able to keep pace with this growing threat in a manner that reflects the growing severity of this problem. And I think when we think about the resources that Taiwan needs to invest in this threat from China, it's both in terms of the financial resources as well as the political resources. And on both accounts right now, I think Taiwan is coming up short. While there has been, I think, noteworthy progress made to increase this defense spending so that it appears to be taking these matters seriously, there needs to be more resources invested in its counterintelligence enterprise as well. There's been internal assessments made in Taiwan by some of the watchdog agencies in Taiwan that have been identified that despite growing defense budgets in Taiwan, the number of counterintelligence personnel working within its various agencies have decreased over recent years, and that is not a good sign when you have this influx of Chinese espionage cases growing.
President Trump has said that Taiwan should be spending to defend itself against Chinese aggression. But Taiwan's premier, who leads the government, says that's not possible. Mm-hmm. So now what?
Well, I think in any democracy, there is a need to be able to, sort of have a public participation in the process of allocating national resources, economic resources. It should be noted that the call for Taiwan to spend more percentage of its GDP on its national defense has been a frequent call by former U.S. administrations. The Taiwan president has recently pledged that he would spend at least 3% of the nation's GDP for increased defense spending. I'm afraid that even that 3% at this point will not be sufficient to alone satisfy the calls for greater defense spending from Taiwan, given the urgency of the threat that the PLA faces. But more important than perhaps the percentage of GDP that Taiwan spends on its defense, one needs to also consider where you're spending it on.
I'm curious to know, has U.S. cuts to the Defense Department, the U.S. Agency for International Development, or other agencies, other programs, has that impacted Taiwan's ability to push back on China's spying and to increase its national defense?
Well, I can say that I think folks in Taiwan are watching, these cuts to U.S. government spending very closely. I think there are areas where the United States and Taiwan cooperate in third countries to help, support Taiwan's international space, and cuts in some areas, in some agencies, could impede those efforts to help, support Taiwan's international space. We're really starting to see China move in with a lot of economic investments, political attention, and trying to really sort of influence these countries in a way that could severely affect both the United States and Taiwan. In other areas that relate to countering disinformation and Chinese malign influence, there have been very effective cooperation between U.S. institutions and Taiwan's non-governmental sectors researching Chinese disinformation and a malign influence that could similarly be impacted if there were further cuts or funding freezes on U.S. Organizations.
It sounds like what you're saying is that the reduction of these programs is essentially going to strengthen China's influence in the region.
Yes.
Should President Trump be talking more about Taiwan?
Well, the president has been talking a bit more about Taiwan. His emphasis has been thus far on the need for greater defense burden sharing, the need for the reduction of the trade deficit with Taiwan, and the critical importance of reshoring of semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States. And so I think the president has been quite clear in terms of his emphasis and what his priorities are with regards to Taiwan. I would hope that the president also looks at the importance of the moral imperatives of Taiwan and the security of Taiwan.
If China's spying is increasing, how much worse is it going to get?
Much worse. Taiwan's efforts to combat Chinese intelligence activities have been, I think, admirable, but it's not adequate to face with what's coming.
Well, we'll definitely be watching. Russell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.